Okay, hello everybody. We are back after having to go take care of some things. My daughters are all set now. So welcome to part 2 of our very first live stream, taking the political compass test. We're about halfway through. If you haven't already, watch part 1. So we're just gonna pick up right where we left off. Adam, does that sound good?
Yep, I'm all set.
Okay. Which question are we on, just to make sure that we're on the same one?
So we finished up chatting about it's good for parents to spank their children. I think we were just finishing that. So the next one is, it's natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I would strongly agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could be swayed to say strongly. I'm going to say strongly, actually, because especially when you're sort of developing into your own person, there needs to be some sort of privacy there. Like, maybe not needs to be, but I think it naturally happens. Like, for me, and for instance, for the first few years that I believed in evolution, I didn't bring it up to my parents. And I think it was kind of a natural thing to hold that as secret, just because I knew the emotional toll it would take on my parents. But I think when you're sort of stepping out, becoming your own person, it's really sort of natural, because as you grow older, you become more rebellious. You find that you disagree with a lot of things that your parents raised you in. And, I think if there was total transparency between you and your parents in that stage, your natural inquisitiveness or your natural ability to be able to find yourself might be stunted almost, because your parents are an authority figure and they might try to sway you one way or the other,
Sure. I think the child's thought about how their parents thinking about them will sway. Essentially, as you're growing up, you explore the world, you are exploring different ideas, and the best place to do that is individually, without either without the fear of upsetting your parents, or even worse, without actually creating a block or a wall between the child and the parent. So I do think it's perfectly natural, especially as they're beginning to explore and figure themselves out and figure out what they believe and what they want to believe about the world.
Right. Yeah, I think we're pretty much agreed there.
Yep.
Hold on, we got a cop coming by.
Speaking of,
yeah. Well, not anymore. Possessing marijuana. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. Strongly agree on that one.
Yeah.
I was one of those who voted to legalize marijuana in Massachusetts in the recent election, and I'm very pleased that it passed.
Yeah, and I'd agree with this essentially, again, on the same principles as I would kind of make an argument for abortion rights, is that the state just really shouldn't be having a say in what you can and can't put in your body.
Yeah, exactly. Also, just from a personal standpoint, I've used it in the past to control things like my anxiety. And I think there's this demonization of it, especially among people who haven't used it. It's kind of like people who are against homosexuals when they've never actually met any. Right. If you don't have personal experience with it, it's very easy for it to be demonized. But really, the effects of it and the negative effects of it are much less, and less than a lot of prescription drugs that we have. Like, marijuana is largely non-addictive. You can't overdose on it. Whereas with a lot of the other opioids and painkillers that people use, they're much more dangerous, much more addictive, and have much more of an ability to ruin your life than something like marijuana does. And you don't really understand the nuance of that, I think, until you've tried it. So from a personal standpoint, obviously, yes, I think it should be legal. Everybody should be able to use it, just on, principle. And then personally, it's helped me quite a bit. So I used to be against it until I had personal experience with it.
Sure. I probably wouldn't use it myself. I don't like the idea of anything that would really kind of interfere with the mind, the thought process. The same would go even simply for too much alcohol as well. So, but I just don't think that it's something that the state should take any interest in.
Yep. Yep. Um, and I think that should be the stance of everybody, regardless if you use it or not.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed.
So, next question. This is a great one. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs.
What do you think?
I strongly disagree.
I would agree with your strong disagreement.
This is one of the things where like, I'm sort of in my family a little bit, because I'm the first one to have gone to college. I'm sort of looked down as the prissy school college kid, liberal college kid, obviously stereotypically. And what I've come to appreciate most, I think, about my education was just that going to a university, going to a college where you're exposed to a diverse range of ideas, and you're exposed to the marketplace of ideas, it fundamentally changes you as a person in the way that you sort of approach the world. And what I mean by that is that it sort of pulls you out of your bubble that you were raised in, and helps you to realize that there's a whole lot of more diversity in the world than you might have realized. And so what I view, obviously I've become much more liberal with my education. I don't think that's always the case. But I don't know, just having an education for education's sake, the liberal arts, the appreciation of the body of knowledge that humans as a species have accumulated, just it's almost like education for education's sake. You know what I'm saying? Sort of like rather than viewing it as pragmatically as this tool to get you farther ahead. I think that's a very uniquely in America. I think that's the overwhelming attitude towards education, is that if it's not preparing you for a job, it's useless. Whereas opening your mind, learning to learn, I think
that's the key one there, actually.
There's just something so empowering about that, and to just have it, not demonized, but looked down upon because it's not preparing you for the real world, in quotes.
Sure.
I kind of bristle at that. So
the main argument I would make for this is your working life is only a small part of your entire existence. So I mean, we only end up working about 40 years of our life, and only that 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So it's a relatively small section of our lives. A fairly important one, obviously, because it is our livelihood and how we can obviously survive. But what education also prepares us to do on top of that is to interact with the world and explore the world, even outside of the context of jobs. By the way, what was your primary and secondary education? Were you in the public schools, homeschooled?
Homeschooled for
all the way through.
Yeah, all the way through. And so going to college was like a watershed moment for me, because like I had always been in this bubble, and I don't know, it's learning how to think,
right.
Is such a big part of education. And there's an attitude in the United States, like people like Mike Rowe. I like the guy, he's a decent dude, but they're all like, screw college, don't go to college, go to trade school and everything like that. And it's like, okay, yes, but how many people who have I met, and I'm not trying to judge anybody, but how many people have I met who are tradespeople who are just, they're very good at their trade, but they're ignorant about almost anything else in the world. And that's not to say that there's not great value in the knowledge that they have, like the everyday working knowledge, like their trade skills and everything like that. But they're unable to interact with the rest of society or ideas in the world in any substantive way.
Right.
It's.
I mean, it might be showing my own bias a little bit as well, but it just seems incredibly boring that our existence surround a single trade and the goings on of our little town and little country, when there is a big wide world out there, both in terms
Exactly.
of ideas and cultures and people.
Yeah, it's a very capitalistic attitude. It's putting the worth of your education essentially on how much money it can get you, rather than the worth of the education for education's sake.
It's defining it by the bottom line again, by the quantitative
exactly
money.
Yeah,
you're right.
Great one. Good question. People with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. No, strongly disagree.
Yeah, I think strongly disagree again. That should be a given. Like the whole with these types of questions, like the purpose for this podcast is literally to argue against these types of ideas. So I don't think it.
Yes, this is one of those questions where it's clearly, are you a Marxist? So no, absolutely not. And it's really interesting to me too, is that, obviously this question comes from the sort of trying to figure out if you're a social Darwinist, really, where I find that, interestingly enough, in the United States, at least, the people who tend to be social Darwinists, not necessarily to the point where don't let people with disabilities reproduce, but the people who say, oh, well, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, it's a kill or be killed world, dog eat dog, very individualistic approach. Basically, the social Darwinism approach is a conservative one. And really? And it seems to me almost like the belief that society should be the idea of, at least like people like my parents, it's like they think, oh, if you believe in evolution, then you're going to be like a social Darwinist. You're going to be okay with people starving to death if they're not fit enough to eat food, right? Whereas it tends to be, in my experience, liberals who are obviously more or want a more compassionate society. You see what I'm saying? Where with the social Darwinism, there's no such thing as societal compassion.
Sure. Yeah. I don't
know if that's your experience.
I do. I do get what you're saying. I just wonder, though, in terms of the conservative side, whether it's a question of the actions of the state. It's like, should the state be interested in helping these types of people, or should it be left to a community voluntary effort?
Right.
So I wouldn't. In other words, I wouldn't completely wipe out the desire to do good on either side, right, simply because they don't want the state to step in. But yeah, I do get what you're saying.
Right. The most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline. Strongly disagree.
I would have strongly disagreed until I had children, and now I only disagree.
Okay, well, I can see where you're coming from there. But
this is not the most important thing,
right,
but it is very good for children to accept discipline.
Yeah. Okay. So
it is.
Yeah.
Because you can't teach them anything unless there is discipline.
True. I guess the thing that I'm more, okay, so it's going to also depend on like the type of discipline. So if it's like a physical discipline, then
right. You're right.
If it's like, structured discipline that's meant to help them, and meant to show them the right way rather than just punishing them for being bad, then yes. But it's almost like the way that the question is framed, it's like that's a very authoritarian thing. I kind of worry about the long-term effects of that.
Sure.
Like, for instance, myself, I was always spanked when I was a kid, and it was, I was always punished, and it was very important for me to accept that and realize that, my parents were above me and all that. And I have a really hard time now. I vacillate between being completely anti-authoritarian, right, and not wanting to listen to anybody, or being far too submissive to people who are above me and not wanting to share my opinion because I'm afraid of like the backlash. So it should never be the case that your children are afraid of you.
Yes, correct.
So like accepting discipline out of fear, I don't like that. Accepting discipline out of an understanding that you want the best for your kids, and ultimately it's what's best for them. Then yeah, I could agree with it. But I still I don't know. I guess I disagree with that.
What about
On its
obedience?
face?
What about obedience?
Yeah. So I think I would classify obedience as different than accepting discipline.
But that's the way that I read the question. Like when you accept discipline, you are coming under the authority of something else, someone else, and so then it's to obey the structure. So like I want my kids to obey the things I say, because one, as a loving father, I'm doing it so that they can flourish the best they can. So I'm going to tell them, don't touch the fire when it's on, and they had better obey me, both for their own sake and for mine, because then I don't need to run into the hospital. And then when it comes, because you yourself, you would want your kids to obey you. You would also want your kids to obey the law.
Right. Well, up to a certain point. Yeah. So, yes, that's true. But I guess my viewpoint is that, where is that obedience coming from? Is it coming from a place of trust, or is it coming from a place of fear? And I want my kids to trust me and obey me because of that, rather than out of fear, which is more or less the way I was raised. It was more of a fear-based obedience rather than respect and a trust.
Sure.
So I think that if you veer too far on either side of this question, you're going to screw up your kids, essentially.
I completely agree. And again, I would never say that it is the most important thing, but I'm not going to strongly disagree with it.
Okay. Yeah, you've convinced me. I'm going to disagree. There are no savage and civilized peoples. There are only different cultures.
I strongly agree with this.
Really?
Yes, I strongly agree.
Wow. Okay, go ahead.
So the basis for the argument is essentially a linguistic one, is that we used to think that the languages of the tribes in the Amazon or in Africa, or even the Southeast Asian languages, were less superior or far less civilized than the European languages.
Right. But in a lot of cases, they're far more complex.
No, they're not. In fact,
you don't think so?
No, not linguistically anyway. There's no more or less complexity within language. Arguably, there's some languages that relative to a language family will have different types of complexity. So for instance, within the Germanic languages, Afrikaans is a less complex language than Dutch, but that's because it's kind of a frontiers language. It kind of had to simplify when it moved to a new context. So like there's almost ecological factors in that, but there's no kind of, on the whole, between language families, there's no greater and lesser complexity. And because of that, because the languages are so complex, they deal with the same type of things, then it must also mean that the cultures themselves are no more or less civilized. You still have relationships, you still have interactions with the environment around you, and each of these languages.
Okay. So you really think so? So you I guess my question to you is that you think that linguistic similarities are a good barometer to judge the civilizedness or the uncivilizedness of a culture.
What I'm saying is that each of these languages are essentially tracked with their environments, and their environments are largely the same. Every human culture is essentially a large nest built with twigs that we hop in and out of our different roles. It doesn't matter where in the world or what is being done on a day-to-day basis. That is the experience of humanity. Is
okay. So this is somewhere where we're going to disagree, because I strongly disagree with this statement.
All right.
I do. So, and maybe this is my although I hate this terminology, I don't like to play identity politics, but maybe it's my privilege, quote unquote, that makes me think this way. But this is somewhere where I completely buck the trend of postmodernism. Absolutely. I tend to be postmodernist in almost everything, except for something like this. And I'm actually going to crib something from a live stream I watched. Sargon of Akkad had just yesterday, I think.
Right.
And I'm telling you that up front. I didn't come up with this, but they were talking about this very similar, the same sort of thing. And he was talking about a culture in Papua New Guinea, where part of the aging rituals, or like the coming of age for men rituals, and this is crass, but literally they from I think daily, from the time that they're like 7 until they're a fully grown man, which is in their teens at some point, they literally they have to daily ingest semen from the male leaders in their culture. And you sort of, yes, I mean, when we're talking about postmodernism, we're saying there's no objective standard there, but it's very hard across cultures, across everywhere. You're going to look at people essentially being the same, and looking at like the age of consent being the same. It's very hard for me to look at that and think that there's an argument where that's just a different culture. I think that is fundamentally violating rights of young men, because they're too young to be making those decisions, and they're sort of being coerced by the culture that they're in to think that's normal and that's okay. Whereas I would say that that's not. I mean, you see this in other places like, Saudi Arabia, where they don't let women drive. This is one of the things where it annoys me to no end, like American feminism, where they're so allied against these oppressive forces for feminism, but they will, if I were to then say, well, yes, I get it, like feminism is a grand thing in places where women don't have same rights, like, Saudi Arabia. And then if I were to say something like that, I'm branded almost as an Islamophobe, because I'm just bringing to light that women don't have these rights in other places of the world. So if you want to have any sort of objective standard of what's right and good, I don't think that you can say all cultures are the same, or they're just different. And I guess I don't know. I mean, I this is probably going to upset some people, but I would say, yeah, if we're asking whether or not there are some cultures that are superior, I would say absolutely yes.
See, and I know the tribe that you're talking about. It was in the first chapter of the cultural psychology textbook I read for a course during undergrad.
Yep.
It's kind of a shock and awe introduction to cultural psychology. But I would largely agree with the outcomes, is that there are things. You're right. The biggest problem with postmodernism and subjectivity, or subjectivism, is that there's no good or bad. But you can't take, I would argue, the philosophy without going in pieces. Like you need to, I think, provide a way in which to make an argument for good or bad, if you're going to use definitions like good and bad. So, for instance, there's nothing savage about their particular practices when, for instance, there's no concept of consent within, or consent via age group in their culture, perhaps.
So let me ask you this. You're a feminist, yeah?
Yeah, I guess. Feminists might argue with the term, yeah, but sure.
Okay. So then how could you necessarily have any sort of leg to stand on when you're protesting for women's rights? If there are other cultures that are perfectly fine without extending those types of rights to women, like, do you understand what I'm trying to say? So, like, those cultures exist. If those are equally valid, then why is it not valid for me to make that choice within this culture, in this context? Why? So essentially, for the shock value, why would it not be totally appropriate for me to start a cult or a clan where we do the exact same thing that tribe does in Papua New Guinea?
Yeah, no, that is the question that needs to be answered by. Well, essentially, I would still argue that there is an absolute morality, and so yes, these people in Papua New Guinea are wrong, and arguments for creating a cult on the basis of superiority of men is also wrong. My initial position to you was, how can you accept some of the postmodern philosophy without going the whole hog? Annoyingly, I think about things in two boxes, right?
Right.
So I do like postmodernism. I think it's very good. I think it's a very accurate way of understanding how humanity is functioning at the moment.
Correct.
But also, I'm a Christian, which doesn't function with postmodernism at all.
It's not. It's a puzzle piece that's for a completely different puzzle.
Correct. So when it comes ultimately to these types of things, I will always default to my Christian box over there. So when you say, are these things right or not, then yes, they're not right.
Okay.
At the same time, though, the way that humanity is understanding itself at the moment is within a postmodern context, and with and I would put you in this category with kind of the devaluing of absolutism and the move towards subjectivism. There always seems to come a point in which postmodernists and subjectivists decide that something is either good or bad.
Right.
Something is either savage or civilized. And whenever anyone gets to that point, they've already broken their own philosophy.
Right.
Maybe that is worth the
yeah. I mean, I guess yeah, definitely. I mean, we could definitely look at postmodernism. I guess, and this is probably because of my own biases, but I'm a huge fan of Enlightenment values, and I think that history has shown that the freest, happiest societies have generally shared liberal values. So I don't think it's crazy to say that objectively there are some cultures that are just better, but we can agree to disagree on that because it seems that we're pretty far apart.
Yes, yeah, I do think so.
Okay. Next question then. We should while I'm thinking about it, we should probably do maybe a debate episode on that.
Yeah, we could do.
Absolutely, because it's kind of politically we agree on a lot of things, so it's kind of hard to find places of disagreement, and this is definitely one of them.
Yes.
All right.
That's right.
And actually, this quiz is a great way of identifying those things.
Good point, actually. We've already come across a couple of things.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. So those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. What do you think?
I would agree. And that is coming from a welfare state perspective. I thoroughly believe in a welfare state. I believe that those that need support should get it from the state. But there are those who will inevitably be on the dole who are able to work and refuse the opportunity, and I do think that is wrong.
Je daar zelfs even aan je man punt koedsel.
Yes. I was teaching John some Scottish insults the other day, and he's trying. He's getting it.
I'm working. I'm improving. So, yeah. I guess I'm somewhere between disagree and agree because while I don't think that those who don't work should get any special treatment, I do believe in a base level of human rights, which I guess would include healthcare and other things. But I wouldn't want to a universal basic income for people who just decide that they don't want to work.
Yeah, sure.
But there are some affordances in society that I think are universal, regardless of whether you're working or not. The extra caveat in here, obviously, is they're refusing the opportunity to work.
Yes, but that's the thing. Yeah.
So I guess I would probably lean more towards agree with that. So I'm going to go with agree, but definitely not strongly. And I'm waffling a little bit.
Sure. Noted.
Yes. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. I disagree.
And I think I would strongly disagree on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to ruminate on things a little bit too much.
Sure,
It's a
sure.
symptom of my mental health. But I mean, I wouldn't say that you want to overthink it. But distracting yourself is not going to fix the problem. So I would disagree with that. Not strongly though. I don't think that you should sort of withdraw into yourself internally.
Sure.
Yeah.
My thinking is that again, with a big picture across all 70, 80 odd years of life, is much better, I think, to just get to the deep truth that's there and then work on it, rather than, like you say, just ignoring it and moving on.
Yep. First-generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their new country. I strongly disagree with that statement.
I agree. I do agree with that.
You do agree with the statement, or you agree with me?
No, I agree with the statement.
So you think that they can't be?
I don't think that they can fully integrate into a new country.
Okay.
Being a first-generation immigrant myself, I don't think you can.
That's true. I have seen things. So actually,
hang on. Sorry, just to clarify before you start, first-generation immigrant, is that the generation that actually moves to the new country, or is that the one born there?
No, that's the one that moves there.
Okay, yeah, all right. In that case, yeah, I do agree.
All right, so I guess the reason I disagree is that I'll give you a prominent example. Ted Cruz. His dad is a first-generation immigrant from Cuba.
Okay,
and he 100% assimilated into American culture, almost to a fault. The guy is 100% the sort of conservative, conservative Christian American values. Anything that the United States can do to stop communism around the world, he's 100% behind it. Like he's like, he would view himself as 100% a patriot. Sure. Half of the country would view himself as 100% a patriot. So I think it is possible. So when the statement says things like never, I would strongly disagree with that, because there are instances of it happening. And integration is interesting. It's different, I think, in the United States integration than it might be for other countries, because we don't really have this sort of idea of multiculturalism. If you don't integrate, you're going to be sort of on the out. And so, I've known Islamic families. I knew a guy, Saeed, who was a first-generation immigrant, and he was, a salt of the earth sort of American. He was just an American. Obviously, he had cultural ties to the country he came from, but it wasn't as if he was not fully integrated and accepting of American values, Sure. Although I will say I probably should defer to you because you've experienced it.
So having been a first-generation immigrant, I'm not an American. I just don't see.
That's right.
Well, for instance, my parents will see they've integrated in so much as like they can live there, they know the values that are there, they share some of the values that are there. My brothers have American accents. My what do you call it? My parents still have Scottish accents, but none of them call themselves American. There will always be a Scottish identity to them. And so I guess it depends on the meaning of the question again in terms of integration. So yes, they can live quite comfortably and they can be accepted by their neighbors and friends around them as neighbors and friends, but can they ever be American? I'm not sure. I'm not 100% convinced.
I would be willing to bet that the answer to this question depends on where they came from.
Well, and I'm also betting that it will depend on what age they were, because I'm expecting that your youngest kids will just adapt the culture that they grew up in. Right. I was kind of old enough when we got there that I was a little bit too old to forget my first culture, that I never really adopted my second. Right.
So there's and I guess I'm going to refine my statement. I say it's probably dependent upon where you come from, because you came from a pretty liberal society that values human rights and things like that.
I came from a white first world country and moved to a white first world country. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So when you're looking at
Largely.
like the Cruzes, like I was just talking, I hate Ted Cruz, don't like him at all, but they came from a communist regime that violated human rights. So obviously you come to America, the land of the free, the home of the brave, they call themselves American because they don't want any sort of inclusion.
Well, that's what I was going to say with Cruz, actually, or Cruz's dad, is that, you know, he's already coming to America with the values. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's an American,
True,
but he became
true.
an American because
Well,
Cuba didn't share his values.
Yeah, and here's another instance. Actually, somebody my dad worked with came from Poland, and this was back in the day when it was, I think, when it was occupied. So the guy was literally captured by like the SS, or not the SS, but like the secret police, and tortured, and like beaten by the police, like very severely. And he moved to the United States, and he doesn't identify as Polish at all. He identifies as American. You know, so like I'm saying, I guess the and you're right. Yes, you probably have the values before you come here, but I think it does ultimately depend on the circumstances that you left to come to the United States.
Sure.
So that's why I would say I strongly disagree, because the statement is never, and I shy away from absolutes.
Sure.
I'm allergic to them.
I will agree, largely because I don't think you can truly leave behind your first culture.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that's another thing that we could talk about.
Sure.
What's good for most successful corporations is always ultimately good for all of us. Strongly disagree.
Strongly disagree as well. I think we've already covered that one quite well.
Yes, yeah. So no discussion needed. No broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. I disagree.
I disagree as well.
I don't strongly disagree, but I highly value things like NPR. I love NPR.
Right. Okay. I was actually expecting you to go on the agree side.
Really?
Yeah. Just that was just an assumption.
Yeah.
Based on.
Well, I guess in the States, like, regardless of who's funding what, Fox News is always going to be Fox News. You know, MSNBC is always going to be MSNBC. CNN.
We've got no idea what the heck CNN's going to be then.
Well, they're just a milquetoast. You probably get more out of like staring at a piece of cardboard than watching the CNN. But I'm actually interested that you disagree, because the BBC tends to be pretty anti-Scott, doesn't it?
Well, I wouldn't call it anti-Scott, but I'll give you kind of an example of the first few days. I think it was actually Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday this week. On Monday, I think it ran the headline that Scottish exports to the rest of the UK were worth 50 billion, right, which is an increase of 4.4%. And that was the headline. Scottish exports to the UK worth 50 billion. What it said in the article was Scottish exports to the UK have risen by 4.4%, as it also has done to the European Union by 4.4%.
Oh, wow.
All right. So the propaganda within the argument is saying that, oh no, the UK economy is worth far more to the Scottish economy than the EU, because here we are sitting thinking, right, should we choose the UK or the EU? Obviously, being an independent country, choosing the EU.
So you would say that not necessarily being anti-Scot, they are anti-Scottish independents.
Correct.
And they do receive funding from the government, yeah? They
do receive a funding from the government, but it's paid for in license fees. So people who have TVs have to pay, I think, is £170 odd a year. We don't have a TV, so we don't pay the license fee.
Right.
And on that basis, then the BBC gets its funding and does with it what it is told to do by its charter, which is kind of decided upon by the government.
Okay. So it's not publicly funded. It just receives some subsidies.
No, but it's fully publicly funded.
It is fully publicly funded.
Yeah, it doesn't receive anything.
Oh, wow.
So the license fee is essentially a tax.
And do you find that influences its content?
I find that the BBC is actually very, very committed to portraying information well and with clarity. In most cases, I think that it will toe the line on certain. So, in other words, like for instance, the BBC I could easily see running fairly anti-Russian stories,
Right.
fairly anti-Scottish independence stories. But the BBC is an institution of the UK, so it kind of has to almost, in philosophy, defend UK values. Interestingly, though the BBC will report on its own internal crises and squabbling, so that kind of gives you an insight into what they do. So overall, every media source will have its biases, and the BBC has that. But in terms of quality of reporting and news, the BBC is quite good, and I think that is a valued asset. Even though I disagree with its positioning sometimes, a valued asset for the country.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's do next page here. How you see wider society. All right.
Yay.
Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. Strongly agree.
Yeah, I think we'd both strongly agree. I don't think we'd be liberal or progressive if we didn't strongly agree with that.
I mean, it's a no-brainer, obviously. I mean, even looking at what Obama's done to expand NSA spying is just a travesty. Yep. And we treat whistleblowers now like traitors.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was Obama's NSA stuff that finally broke the camel's back for me. And it was after that came out that I decided that I no longer wanted to live in the States. So
yeah, it's going to be interesting what's going on. Trump's pick for the CIA, Brennan. No, not Brennan. Forget the guy's name, but his pick for CIA. I'm terrible with names, by the way. He's of the opinion that Edward Snowden should be killed.
Wow.
Executed. Okay. So the CIA has been known to do stuff like that in the past. So if Snowden mysteriously gets in an accident, let's say, I'm not, I don't want to get black bagged or anything, but you might want to question the legitimacy of that accident.
Noted.
A significant advantage of one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in a democratic political system. Strongly disagree.
I think I strongly disagree with that one as well. Arguably, the same could be said for a two-party state, but
right.
Who's saying?
Well, I mean, the thing is with the two-party, I mean, the two-party state, I think, is so obstructionist lately, at least in the United States, that it is
in general obstructionist.
It's terrible. Well, and here's the thing. It's like there's nobody working on principle anymore. I mean, there are some like, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and stuff like that. But, I mean, you look at like, Chuck Schumer comes out and he's like, well, everything that Trump does, we're going to oppose him. And it's like, you're just doing what the Republicans did to Obama and saying, we're not going to let anything go through, even if it's stuff that we want. Like, I mean, they've had 6 years to replace the Affordable Care Act. Why haven't they come up with a replacement? The reason is the Affordable Care Act was their idea in the first place. So they're painting themselves into a corner because they are saying, oh, it's horrible. It's terrible. It's awful. Essentially what I'm expecting is they're going to repeal it and replace it with something that's almost identical because they've had 6 years to come up with something else. They've demonized their own idea. So now what else can they do? The only other thing that you could do is go back to a completely private system.
And you don't think they'll go back to a private system?
I don't think so.
No?
I don't think so because there's all the eyes are on them. They've promised a repeal and a replace. And if they don't replace it with something, then, that's not going to go over well.
Sure.
Although being Republicans, they'll control the narrative on it and make it sound like it's the Democrats' fault.
Yes, they will.
It's just pathetic because, some like there are liberals out there now, like progressive liberals, who are angry or feigning outrage that Trump axed the TPP, when it's like, no, be like Bernie Sanders is approaching it exactly right. What we agree with you on, we will work with you on. What we disagree with you on, we will fight you. So if you want to do infrastructure spending, we're there. Great, we'll do it. If you want to cancel the TPP, we're there. We'll do it. If you want to infringe on people's rights and tell us that Muslims can't come into the United States, we're going to oppose you.
Yes.
And I think that's the most effective way to be in opposition because it actually lends legitimacy to you. You're not just an obstructionist. You are in opposition holding that government accountable.
Sure. I would take this a few steps beyond the US. So obviously the UK is a multi-party system. However, it rarely, and we just had one before this government, have a coalition government where two parties work together to make the government. I would argue for that type of system, where not only do you have a multi-party system, but that the government has to be made up of at least two parties as well, because then you get the most minds thinking from many different places, creating better policy. And arguably, democracy is supposed to yield the boring average, so that not everyone gets what they want.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you get some of what you want. And so not only is a multi-party state good, but coalition government's good. And you'd never have that in the States.
Yeah, no. I mean, since my freshman year in college, I've been advocating for, as soon as I realized it was a thing, I've been advertising. I've been advocating for a proportional representation system.
Sure.
Where it's not first past the poll, it's literally whatever percentage of the vote in the state you get for your party. We have these selected people who will sit in. You're not voting for a candidate, you're voting for a party or a platform.
And having been in both systems, I would choose the second as well.
Oh, of course. It's not perfect, but it's closer to actual representation.
Yes, definitely. Right.
Okay. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. Strongly disagree.
I think the adage, perhaps not an adage anyway, but the idea that left-leaning government should never create a larger surveillance state because soon you're going to have to hand it over to the right wing.
Exactly.
I think that's largely the basis of my argument there.
Well, that's the other thing the left did in the United States. It's like, oh yeah, well, Obama is expanding the NSA, but that's okay because he's liberal and we can trust him, which we couldn't in the first case. But now we have Trump. It's like, okay, so you were okay with him expanding those, and now the door's open. You've opened Pandora's box, and now Trump has the exact same capabilities. And you think that he's anywhere near as dignified as Obama? Do you think he's not? Do you think that with the temptation there, Trump wouldn't be willing to use that for personal ends? Absolutely not. And that's another thing. We know that it was used for personal ends. Inside the NSA, there were people, I forget what it's called. They had a name for it because it was so prevalent. People would literally spy on their love interests because they had the ability to.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you don't need to only worry about it if you're a wrongdoer. You have to, it's a fundamental right of privacy that is being violated. And if you're not outraged at a couple people losing their rights of privacy, you're not outraged about anybody losing their right of privacy.
Yep, that's right.
It's the principle. There is no, that's the problem. There's like no principled politicians or anybody nowadays. Are we surprised? Are we surprised? No, we're not surprised, but it's, I'm not happy about it. All right. The death penalty should be an option for most serious crimes. I disagree.
I strongly disagree. And actually, when I was in the States, I would have agreed to this. But since coming back, I've kind of taken the position now that I'm very uncomfortable with the state taking the lives of its citizens for any reason. I think that simply by citizenship or because of citizenship, the state, no matter how wrong you go by it, the country itself, the state itself, should not have the right to take your life. I think that's a fundamental right.
Right. That I 100% I 100% agree. And also, I'm cribbing another argument from Kyle Kulinski at Secular Talk. Essentially, he's not even, and I wouldn't necessarily say that the death penalty isn't warranted for some crimes. Some people, yes, I think absolutely deserve to die for things that they do. However, we get the wrong people sometimes. And so
that is true as well, yeah.
And so if you're, as the state, are going to say, well, the penalty for killing somebody or murdering somebody is the death penalty, and the death penalty system, if in effect murders people because it's killing innocent people, then you have to give the death penalty and get rid of it.
I don't agree with the logic, but
I don't agree with the logic either. But essentially, the idea is that if we get the wrong people some of the time, on principle, I can't agree with that sort of system.
Yeah. See, I would say that there's no crime, I think, that necessarily warrants the death penalty. Largely because I also don't believe in the eye for the eye, tooth for a tooth thing as well. In other words, I'm just very uncomfortable with the idea of the state taking the lives of its own citizens. That just is essentially the ultimate pro-life position, in that life is so special that even under the most extreme circumstances, it shouldn't be just wiped out.
Right.
That's kind of my position on it. Maybe a little bit extreme and maybe needs a little bit more thinking through, but that's kind of my position just now.
Okay. In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below to be commanded. I am again in between disagree and agree on this one.
Sure.
I probably lean more towards a disagree though.
I was going to say I'm going to put disagree on this one, largely because so while the looking back at the kids example on accepting discipline, I think it's really important for people to have a good understanding of discipline and obedience. But I think that's largely for kind of a personal discipline, in that you're not stealing from someone, not because, kind of getting back to what you said, not because the law says don't steal, but because you're a disciplined enough person not to take someone else's stuff.
Right.
And so in this case, I wouldn't necessarily have to say that there needs to be this type of authoritarian structure.
Right. I agree with that 100%. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything, should it be considered art at all? I would agree with that, just because I'm not a huge fan of abstract art, I guess. I mean, it's so subjective.
I'm going to strongly disagree because I love abstract art. Modern art is I thoroughly enjoy it. I think it's really cool.
Okay. All right. Well, that's I think that's a pretty inconsequential point.
I think so. I don't know.
I don't know why that's in there. In criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. Strongly disagree.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to agree with you on that one.
And just because, just look at the results. The United States is heavily on the punish versus rehabilitate side, and we have one of the highest recidivism rates in the world.
Yep.
Whereas you look at some Nordic countries where their systems are so far to rehabilitation, it's almost like too far. Like, these people get their own houses and they live in like a community and all this kind of stuff, but the recidivism rates there are so low.
Yeah, that's right.
Because you're treating them like people who need help rather than bad things to be punished and kind of just locked away from society and forgotten.
Correct. I think there's even a program in the Netherlands in which inmates are allowed to use communal kitchens with knives and all this good like cookery equipment. And what they do in these is actually prepare them to go back out into the world by teaching them how to cook and how to prepare food, so that when they actually do leave, they can take care of themselves.
Right.
There's evidence, again, particularly from the Nordic countries in Northern Europe, Belgium and the Netherlands, that just point to rehabilitation practices work far more than punishment. So.
Right. I mean, it makes sense too, because you have in the United States, if you are serving 10 years for whatever, there's a high chance that you'll become institutionalized to the point where you cannot go back out into society and be productive. Yeah. And then there's also a huge bias against people who are ex-cons in the United States, because we have this idea of, oh, you're bad, you know, even if it's like just, something that was in their life circumstances, they're not a bad person. It's just that they were in a bad circumstance. And so, it's harder for people to get jobs after prison. It's hard for them to assimilate back in the culture, and then they end up back in prison because, I mean, of course they're going to. There's not a lot of compassion there. It's not like, well, yeah, you know what? If my cards had been dealt a little differently, I might be in the same situation.
Sure.
So it's definitely high priority to rehabilitate.
Well, next question is actually related.
Yeah. It's a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some criminals. I, again, strongly disagree. I mean, I think that you have to make the effort.
Yes, agreed. Norway also has the problem of Anders Breivik, who was responsible for the Oslo bombings and the something island massacre in which he killed like 17 teenagers.
Right.
the maximum penalty for any crime, no matter how bad, Norway is 30 years imprisonment.
Right.
And we'll see what Norway decides to do. Apparently, it does have things within its law that mean that criminal, the punishment can be extended.
Right. There are mechanisms for that to happen. I would find it very hard to believe if he were able to get out.
Yeah. Well, right. Yeah, and I'd be surprised as well.
I mean, he's shown no remorse. He said he would do it again.
Right. He has been able to take master's degrees, and I think he's been able to do a PhD as well, or at least I think he's currently in his PhD.
Right.
And like you said, even the attempt at rehabilitating someone like Anders Breivik must be worth something.
Yes. I mean, he's a human being who has value, even though the things that he's done.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a just, civilized society extends those rights even to criminals.
Yes. So much so that I think he actually took the Norwegian government to court because they wouldn't.
He did. I read about that.
Out to do his PhD. He's like, well, no,
exactly.
I'm gonna let you out.
The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. Strongly disagree. There's absolutely no. Nope.
Yeah, I mean
that goes without saying.
Yeah, viewed from the lens of the capitalist system, perhaps, but we're not entirely capitalists.
No. Well, we're not anarcho-capitalists, at least. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. I'm going to disagree on that one.
Yeah, I will definitely disagree. I'm flirting between disagree and strongly disagree. I don't think it's necessarily let me put it this way. When my wife ended work to have her son, she thought, right, we'll get through the pregnancy, we'll get through maternity leave, and then we'll go back to work. And actually, the time that she's about to go back to work is coming up in a couple of weeks, and she's struggling to go back. She's struggling to want to go back. And so I guess my point of this is mothers may have careers, mothers may be homemakers, and it is up to the women to decide what they value more.
Exactly. That's always been my position too. Well, not always. Since I become a liberal, that's been my position. Because ultimately, I view feminism, right, as the ability of women to make their own choice, which is why I shy away from feminists who say that women who do X or women who do Y are not feminists and they're hurting the cause, right? So, sure. Like laws in France where you can't wear a burqa. Okay, I understand that the burqa is like a symbol of oppression for women and all this kind of stuff. So you're banning it because it's you're banning these things that are oppressive to women. Well, what if there's a woman who wears it out of religious devotion and does not feel oppressed by it?
Correct.
So it's her choice to do that, and she's not being forced to. That to me is the more feminist position, the more rights-based position, because you're preserving the rights for women to self-identify and to self-determine what they want to do.
Sure. And on that basis, then I don't think that there is a first duty, and so I will strongly disagree.
Exactly
with the question. So.
Yep. Multinational companies are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developed countries. I strongly agree on that.
Yep, strongly agree as well. Developing countries.
Yes, developing countries.
Yep, definitely agree.
Oh, this is a good one. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. I strongly disagree.
Never.
And that might be because I'm immature.
But we shall not be moved.
Right. Well, I mean, I think about, and again, I keep going back to this guy, but he's become a personal hero. Bernie Sanders or FDR. These are people who, no matter how old they are, Bernie Sanders is like 95 and, he's 74, but like he looks like he's 95 and he is never made a peace with the establishment. And because of that, he's been a progressive firebrand, just a leader for these sorts of values. Right. And I think that this whole idea, the entire idea of that is almost just like giving up. Like I get to a point where I realize I can't change anything. So I just need to accept the status quo and make peace with it so that I can, go about living my life and not feeling terrible.
Sure.
But I don't think that it's maturity. I just think that it's sort of getting, to quote from Lord of the Rings, not fighting your chains or accepting the walls out of use and old age of your cell. So you just kind of get beaten down by the system.
I think it's a healthy part of our existence to be skeptical,
Right.
to be skeptics, to be challenging traditions and authority. And I think if at any point you give that up, I think that'd be a sad point of view. I think we should always be challenging the things that are that we're being told are the status quo or are necessary.
Right. All right. So next page here. These next two should go pretty quickly.
All right. Okay.
If you got through that, okay. Yes, I think so. If you got through that, okay, you'll find these propositions on religion a breeze. Okay. Astrology accurately explains many things. Strongly disagree.
I don't think it even warrants a conversation, to be honest.
No, it doesn't. You cannot be moral without being religious. Strongly disagree.
I will disagree. Well, it depends on what they mean by the question, but what I'm reading it as is that humans are incapable of doing moral things without being religious, and I would disagree with that. I think that people can be moral.
Charity is better than Social Security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. I disagree.
I strongly disagree.
Yeah.
I think that the state is required to bring about the necessary equality that's needed. I don't think charity can do it at all.
Right, establishing inequality of opportunity.
Right.
Not necessarily, obviously not equality of outcomes, but equality of opportunity.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Some people are naturally unlucky. I strongly disagree with that.
I will strongly disagree with you also.
I'm
hesitating between disagree and strongly disagree, but generally don't believe in luck.
Yeah, I don't believe in luck at all. It is important that my child's schools instills religious values. I strongly disagree with that as well.
And I will do that. That's up to me. That's up to the family, I think.
Exactly. That's what I think makes public schools so successful, is that there is no religious position.
And besides, if you're talking about a pluralistic society anyway, the school can't take a position. It has to be secular.
Right.
So it has to take a
non-biased. So, we good there? Next page. Finally, a look at sex. Okay. Sex outside of marriage is usually immoral. I would strongly disagree with that statement.
And I will strongly agree with that statement.
Really? Obviously, you're looking at it through your Christian box.
Yeah, well, that's my default position. Like, if that is what I believe is the absolute morality, then sex outside of marriage is immoral.
Right. Yes, because that, I guess, is not a political question. That's more of a personal question.
Correct.
A same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. I agree with that.
Strongly agree as well.
Yeah, I'm actually going to strongly agree. Yeah, I think if you look at the evidence, there's really no difference. Actually, the difference would be the difference between a two-parent household versus a one-parent household. And I think that regardless of same-sex versus a heterosexual, it's universally better for the child to have more than one parent.
Fair enough. I haven't seen any numbers on that. My thoughts were that as long as the relationship truly is a stable and loving one, then every kid turns out okay. I've never found evidence for kids coming out of a stable, loving household that haven't been.
And I think too, the assumption is that two people who stay together generally have more loving relationships. Than divorces skyrocketed. There's no incentive really for people to stay together anymore. So people who do have longer relationships and stay together generally have better relationships.
Right.
Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for adult population. I agree.
I would strongly agree.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to strongly agree on that one too,
again, this is all down to what the state. Yeah. Well, exactly what the state has in saying what we can and cannot do.
Right. So you would say it would be immoral or bad for somebody to look at it, but it should never be illegal.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, pornography, I would say, is immoral, but it's not for the state to tell people whether or not to partake in pornography or not.
Right. What goes on in a private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state.
Can you guess what I'm going to say on that one?
I'm going to say you're going to strongly agree on that one.
I'm going to strongly agree on that
Okay.
one.
All right.
The state should have nothing to do with our personal lives that way.
Absolutely. This is so funny. There was a case, this is kind of off topic, but there was a case of Ted Cruz when he was the AG of Texas, where literally he tried to pass a law that women could not buy sex toys. And he defended the thing in front of the Supreme Court in Texas. And it's like, you are the small government conservative, you know?
Yeah, well, right. So, I mean, don't get me started on the ridiculous paradox that is the conservative position on sex.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Which is essentially, we're a small government unless you want to buy toys or watch this or play with that. Or,
oh, really? It's true. It's
absolutely ridiculous.
Hypocritical.
Absolutely.
No one can feel naturally homosexual. Strongly disagree.
I would strongly disagree with you. Strongly disagree with the statement as well. I think that people can, and we can get into kind of the
psychology
behind
that.
that.
Exactly.
If we want in a future episode, but I do think that is the case.
Right. These days, openness about sex has gone too far. I disagree.
I disagree as well.
I still think in the United States, there is still a taboo around it in a lot of ways, and I would not say that it's gone too far. Absolutely not.
Right. At
least as far as openness. I mean, the saturation or like the idolization of it, we can argue about that, but openness about it, I think there's not an openness about it. You know, especially in attitudes you see in the United States about, you know, sex education and stuff like that.
Sure. And as you mentioned, idolizing there, I'm also, something that jumped in my mind was the idolization of even things like purity and,
right.
You know, the particularly like religiously conservative views of sex as well. Is that,
yes.
that you go too far the other way and it becomes in itself unhealthy. And
right.
so you've got kids coming out now that fairly conservative upbringings that are, you know, they have issues,
accepting their
mental
natural,
health issues.
Yeah, exactly. And even
surrounding their sex life.
Right. And even accepting, you know, the natural, you know, I mean, sex is I wouldn't say it's neither a good or bad thing. It just is. And like just accepting that it's a natural thing, even, you know, it's not, you know, there's such a, the effect of purity culture, I think it has the exact opposite effect of what it's trying to go for. Because it's literally in a lot of cases, and I'm not saying all cases, but a lot of cases in the United States, especially when it's religiously driven, it's like sex is something that's, you know, dirty, that you shouldn't partake in, and you need to save it for the person that you love.
Right. See, this is the problem, and I think we'll get this to this at some point. I really don't like the state being the arbiter of morality, and if that is the case, then I do not want law being legislated on the basis of morality, especially within a pluralistic society. So I would say, for instance, sex outside of marriage is immoral. I would say that homosexuality is immoral. I would say that abortion and pornography and countless other things are immoral. But these should not be legislated by the state. If we're going to live in a liberal and a progressive society that protects the rights of all citizens, the state should have severe limits on how it actually interferes with our life,
right.
Especially
no, absolutely, I totally agree. So we're done. Those are all the questions. Now let's see where we stand. Should we bother reading this explanation?
That
might take a while.
I think we can post it as a link on Twitter.
Yeah. So I'm gonna copy this link here, so that we'll have it. So let's see. Oh. Yep, obviously.
Is that what you expected? So your political compass, economic right, left, what is your number there?
I am a negative 5.63.
Right, so I'm a negative 3.5.
So I'm a little bit further to the left than you on economics.
Yes.
And on the social libertarian, I'm a negative 6.92.
6.82, negative 6.82.
So you're
more extreme than I am.
you're basically we're basically exactly the same as far as libertarian goes, like 0.1 points away, but you're a little bit closer, about halfway closer to center.
That's correct. That sounds about right, because I would still argue that even though we should have things like a welfare state and social programming, I would still argue for good free market capitalism that encourages business.
Yeah,
so that makes more sense.
So you're about like right there where my pointer is?
Let me see. Different.
Can you even see the pointer?
Yes.
Is that where you are?
That's almost exactly where I am. Yeah.
Okay. So there we are. And actually, I think we sort of expected that in the conversation, because you were openly talking about how you are more accepting of a free market or reliance on a free market than I am. So that makes sense. But yeah, so there you go, everybody. Cold, hard evidence that we are actually liberals, even if we don't take part in identity politics, or some of the outrageous things that the left is famous for nowadays. We are essentially quite liberal when you're looking at the center. We're both pretty far from center.
Yeah, well, and I think the main thing that kind of makes us liberal is actually the libertarian element at the bottom there, because that is essentially the ability for the state to have a say in our lives, which obviously I've ranted and raved about this entire recording. But anyway,
I think this went well, especially for a first live stream. I definitely want to do it again in the future. Maybe even something like, because we touched on it in the podcast, but something like along the lines of like an analysis of we had talked about this before, like an analysis of like Brave New World by Aldous Huxley or something like that. That would be something that's great for a live stream, I think, because it's more free just to talk about ideas, and that would be a great sort of segue to talk about our ideal political systems.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So, yeah, everyone, if you enjoyed today, don't forget to follow us at Commoners Pod on Twitter, where we'll give you any updates about any live streams, any episodes coming up. What is it? February 6th, we'll be having our next episode on patriotism, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And we'll also give an update of Trump's first couple weeks in office, because it has been quite eventful.
To say the least, yeah.
And we will be posting this as a episode. So if you don't want to watch it on YouTube, it will be on the on iTunes Monday. So Adam, do you have anything else to say?
No, but that was very interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and unsurprisingly, we more or less agree in most positions, but we'll have to pick through those disagreements at some point.
Absolutely. I think we uncovered a lot of material to use for future episodes.
Excellent. Good.
Great. Good talking to you.
Yeah, you too.
It's getting late over on your side of the pond, so have a good night.
Good luck with the kids.
Yeah, I gotta go take care of my kids now.
All right, see ya.
Later.